It was the kind of judgment that could cost you. Not because of Darnell Cooper's own actions, but for the symbol emblazoned on a customer's back. A vest that screamed trouble to the uninitiated. And for those who dared to judge, it was a profound miscalculation. The scene was Modesto, California, on a Thursday morning already simmering with the relentless heat. By 9 a.m., the sun wasn't just shining. It was a physical presence, scorching through shirts, making the very concrete radiate an almost palpable warmth. Darnell Cooper wasn't just an employee at Vince's Custom Cycles. He was an institution, a fixture for nearly a decade and a half. His routine was as reliable as the sunrise, early arrival, a steaming thermos of coffee, his worn black boots, and a silent, knowing nod to anyone who punched in after him. Darnell wasn't one for fanfare or boastful claims. He didn't need to be. In the cutthroat world of custom bikes, longevity wasn't measured by words, but by the undeniable skill of one's hands. And Darnell's hands? They were legendary. He could strip down a carburetor sight unseen and diagnose a lean-burning engine purely by the unique cough and sputter it made when the throttle was gunned. That particular morning, the familiar rhythm of the garage was punctuated by Vince's sharp command echoing across the vast space. "Darnell! Up front! Walk in! Rear belt shredded!" Wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag, Darnell moved instinctively towards the gaping bay door. And then he saw it. Not just a motorcycle, but a statement. A 2005 Harley Dyna Superglide, grimy, roaring with raw power, and exuding that undeniable, menacing aura that true riders craved. Yet, it wasn't the bike itself that seized Darnell's attention. It was the stark, unambiguous emblem emblazoned across the back of the man's cut-off denim vest. The iconic, red and white, Hell's Angels rocker. Undeniably authentic, complete with a smaller Modesto chapter tag nestled beneath it. Now for Darnell. This wasn't uncharted territory. His tenure at Vince's meant he'd seen every stripe of humanity roll through those doors. Retired sheriffs, men fresh out of lockup, weekend hobbyists, and the most hardened, genuine riders. His philosophy was simple, unwavering. He asked no questions for which he didn't require an answer. If your cash was green or your card cleared, you were a customer. No exceptions, no judgments, period. The rider was a white man, likely in his late 40s, his face a canvas, of weathered skin and deep-set eyes, his arms a road map of intricate tattoos. "You Darnell?" the gruff voice inquired. "That's me," Darnell replied evenly. The man continued. "The guy out back said you're the only one who really knows what the hell he's doing around here." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Darnell's lips. "Depends what you're trying to get done." The rider smoothly kicked out the stand of his bike, offering a brief, almost dismissive shrug. "Belt snapped on the way in. And she's spitting and popping, too. Think the timing might be off." Darnell knelt beside the beast, his gaze already meticulously assessing the damage. "You ride it like you stole it," he observed, a hint of dry wit in his voice. A low chuckle rumbled from the man. "Is there any other way?" And just like that, an unspoken understanding settled between them. The work began. Darnell smoothly rolled the Harley inside, commencing his expert inspection. Their conversation was sparse, practical, the language of mechanics and riders, engine modifications, the virtues of different oils, the best tires to endure the scorching California heat. No personal disclosures, no prying questions. The man introduced himself simply as Royce, no last name offered. And Darnell, true to his code, didn't press. Their connection was built on a bedrock of mutual respect, a unique bond that exists between riders and the mechanics who keep their machines breathing. It's a profound trust, an implicit understanding that the hands working beneath your bike hold your very life in their care, ensuring you won't be sent tumbling at 90 miles an hour down the unforgiving expanse of I-5. Barely an hour later, Darnell emerged from his focused work. The shredded belt was replaced, the timing meticulously tuned, the chain tightened to perfection, and for good measure the apwatsauso manged aso yersowakso. Fasa fabdelin minao wardens roa some my raora Norris maffer. Baba about those my sauce have been thoroughly cleaned. Royce's face split into a wide grin. She feels better already, he declared, and I haven't even swung a leg over her. Darnell allowed himself a small smirk. She'll hold up. Just try not to ride her like you're invincible. Royce extended a hand, rough and calloused from years of gripping handlebars. Appreciate it, man. You know, people don't always treat us right. You didn't flinch. You just did the work. Darnell gripped Royce's calloused hand firmly. I fix bikes. I don't fix people. The moment resonated with a rare authenticity. Two men from starkly different worlds forging a connection through the shared language of grease, gas, and grit. Darnell watched as Royce roared out of the lot, his engine a deep, resonant growl, a dog unleashed into the wild. But someone else had been watching too. Zach, a younger co-worker, a man who thought he was clever, thought he was funny, had discreetly snapped a photo on his phone while Darnell was immersed in repairing Royce's bike. He'd even captioned it with a smug, "Guess who's patching up the angels today?" He hadn't bothered to show Darnell, hadn't said a word to Vince. Instead, he'd casually tossed it onto his private Instagram, anticipating a few cheap laughs. Yet that single post, that one ill-conceived photo, was poised to upend Darnell's entire existence. By the next morning, Darnell felt an undeniable shift in the shop's atmosphere. It wasn't loud, not overtly tense, just subtly off. Fewer casual greetings, less direct eye contact. It felt as though people were watching him, but no one dared to acknowledge it. He initially dismissed it, attributing it to the stifling heat or simply collective fatigue. But when Vince, his boss, walked past him in the bay without even a customary nod, Darnell knew, with a cold certainty, that something was profoundly amiss. Lunchtime found Darnell in his usual spot, alone on the old bench out back, halfway through his sandwich, when Zach appeared, phone in hand, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yo, Coop," Zach called out. "You see the comments on my story yesterday?" Darnell slowly lifted his gaze. "What story?" Zach turned the screen towards him. There it was, the incriminating photo of Darnell crouched beside Royce's motorcycle, the Hell's Angels patch starkly visible in the frame. The caption glared. "Darnell switching teams. Guess we gotta start calling him Big Red." Below it, a dozen comments cascaded, each one a fresh stab. "Yo, he in deep now. Ain't that shop affiliated with the Vagos? Watch him start rolling with the crew." A suffocating tightness gripped Darnell's chest. He rose slowly. "You posted this?" Zach shrugged, as if it were an inconsequential prank. "It's a joke, man. Don't be so serious. Everyone knows it ain't real." But the damage, Darnell realized, was already irrevocably done. That very afternoon, a long-standing customer waiting for a tire installation specifically requested a different mechanic, mumbling that he'd return next week if Darnell wasn't available. Another man stood at the front counter, whispering conspiratorially to the receptionist, his eyes darting towards Darnell as if he were concealing an explosive device. And still, Vince remained silent, an ominous silence that spoke volumes. Darnell understood the terrifying speed with which such rumors could spiral in a place like Modesto. It didn't take much, a single suspicious glance, a half-truth twisted into a full-blown fabrication. And suddenly, your identity was stripped away. You weren't the skilled mechanic who fixed bikes. You were the dark whisper in the break room, the subject of hushed speculation. By the end of his shift, Darnell had reached his breaking point. He walked directly into Vince's office, wiping the sweat from his forehead, before firmly closing the door behind him. "You got a minute?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. Vince didn't even glance up from his desk. "You working on that Buell?" "I was. Now I'm here." Vince finally leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Darnell. "All right, what's on your mind?" Darnell didn't hesitate. "That picture. The one Zach posted." Vince's jaw tightened, working as if he were meticulously chewing words, tasting them, before finally spitting them out. "You got a lot of nerve bringing that to me, Darnell." Darnell blinked, genuinely stunned. "Come again." Vince's voice was laced with simmering frustration. "You think I like getting calls from old customers asking if we're working with outlaw clubs now? You think that's good for business? I fixed a man's bike. That's all I did. You know that." Darnell's voice was firm, disbelief warring with rising anger. "You fixed his bike," Vince countered, standing slowly, his voice rising. "In front of God and everybody with a smile on your face." Darnell took a step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "So what? You telling me we're turning people away based on what jacket they wear now?" Vince stood up, a slow, deliberate movement. "I'm telling you, this ain't a good look for you or for us. But you didn't have a problem with the skinhead whose triumph I worked on last month," Darnell retorted, his voice cutting. "You didn't care when that dude with the Confederate flag keychain dropped off his Honda. So why now?" Vince offered no reply. That silence, heavy and suffocating, told Darnell everything he needed to know. But before Darnell could turn and walk out, Vince spoke, delivering words that stopped him cold. "Darnell," Vince said, his voice low, almost an ominous murmur. "I'm letting you go." Just like that. No warning, no sit-down discussion, no final write-up or probation. 15 years. Obliterated in 5 chilling words. Darnell blinked hard, struggling to process the pronouncement. He wasn't even sure he had heard it correctly. "You're firing me for what?" Vince looked down at his desk as if the papers there might lend him the courage his own spine lacked. "It's not a good fit anymore." "A good fit?" Darnell's voice cracked, raw with incredulity and betrayal. "I trained half the guys in that shop. I've stayed late, worked holidays, took pay cuts when you asked. Now I'm not a good fit?" Vince meticulously avoided his gaze. "This isn't personal. Everything about it is personal." The room seemed to shrink, the air growing impossibly thin. Darnell's ears buzzed, a high-pitched ring that he couldn't distinguish as the heat, or the fury, or simply the shock of it all. "You know what this is," he said, his voice now a low, dangerous rumble. "It ain't about no damn photo. You're afraid of what people think, not what's real." Vince didn't deny it. He didn't even attempt a justification. He simply reached into a drawer, pulled out a thin envelope, and slid it across the desk. "Final check? Plus your vacation hours?" Darnell didn't touch it. You ever think what kind of message this sends? He asked, his voice laced with bitter irony. To everyone else? To the young cats in that shop watching how you treat people? Vince finally lifted his eyes, meeting Darnell's gaze for the first time since the devastating declaration. I'm thinking about keeping my doors open, Darnell. That's what I'm thinking about. Darnell stared at him for a long, heavy second, the silence stretching between them like an invisible chasm. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The soft click of the office door closing behind him resonated louder than any argument could have. The shop was eerily quiet. He could feel eyes on him, some filled with curious speculation, others with a heavy guilt, some feigning ignorance, pretending they hadn't overheard the muffled shouting. Zach was in the corner meticulously arranging the coolant shelf, though he pointedly refused to meet Darnell's gaze. Back at his station, Darnell opened his drawer, pulled out his toolbox key, and unlocked the chest he'd been filling for 15 years. Socket by socket, wrench by wrench, each tool a testament to honest labor. He packed them away. His movements were slow, deliberate, unhurried, as if he intended every single person in that building to witness his departure and remember it. On his way out, he paused at the time clock, his fingers moving with practiced ease to punch out for the last time, without uttering a single word. Outside, the relentless heat of Modesto struck him like a physical blow. He settled into the driver's seat of his old Silverado, his gaze fixed on the dashboard, the world outside falling silent, save for the soft ticking of the cooling engine. His phone vibrated, a text message from an unknown number. Heard what happened. That was wrong, bro. I'm sorry. No name, no bravery. He tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. That night, sleep was an elusive phantom. Darnell lay awake, staring at the slow, hypnotic spin of the ceiling fan overhead, his mind replaying the swift, brutal demolition of his reputation. It wasn't about what he had done, but about the distorted perception of what others thought he had done. 15 years of unwavering work, steadfast loyalty, and honest sweat, all erased by a single photograph and a handful of frightened whispers. He wasn't broken, though. He was simmering with a cold, hard anger. And beneath that anger, something potent was beginning to coalesce. Resolve. Because if he didn't uncover the true source of this malicious rumor, if he didn't clear his name, his life would remain forever tainted. And he absolutely refused to let a cheap joke ruin everything. The next day, Darnell woke early, a habit ingrained by years of early shifts. His body instinctively moved through the motions of preparing for work. Coffee, shower, lacing up his work boots. But this time, there was nowhere to be. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long while, staring at his calloused hands, the tools of his trade now idle. His phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from an old co-worker. Man, that was messed up. You good? He didn't reply. Instead, he grabbed his keys, loaded his toolbox into the bed of his truck, and headed into town. Not for a job, not yet. Just to move, to think, to escape the suffocating silence of his apartment. He pulled up to Skip's auto, a no-frills, family-owned garage on the south side of Modesto. Skip was old school, a white man in his 60s, with a pronounced gut and a noticeable limp. But he had always treated Darnell with unwavering respect, as an equal. They'd shared side work over the years, even a beer or two at a neighborhood cookout. Skip spotted Darnell pulling in and walked out, wiping his hands on a greasy towel. "You look like you just buried someone," he observed. "Just got fired for doing my job," Darnell replied, his voice flat. Skip's eyebrow arched in surprise. "Heard some rumblings about that? Something about a biker?" Darnell nodded. "Guy from the Hells Angels, walk in, needed help. I fixed his bike. That's it." Skip shook his head slowly, a knowing look in his eyes. "Let me guess. Some punk took a picture. It got twisted up and Vince folded like a lawn chair." "That about sums it up," Darnell confirmed. They stood there for a silent beat. Skip leaned against the door frame, squinting thoughtfully at the bustling street. "I hate to say it," he finally murmured, "but I've seen this movie before. You're black, and he was a white biker with a reputation. People start assuming things. Nobody wants the heat. They let you take the fall." Darnell offered no words. He didn't have to. The brutal truth had already been articulated. "You need anything?" Skip asked, his voice softening. "Money? Work? Appreciate it," Darnell said, "but I'm not done with this yet." That night, Darnell sat at his kitchen table, his gaze fixed on the photograph Zach had posted. It was still there, prominently displayed. Dozens more comments had piled up, a few attempting humor but most laced with genuine malice or fearful speculation. One comment in particular stood out, chilling him to the bone. "So Vince's shop is doing business with gang members now?" Another, "I always knew something was off about that dude." Darnell meticulously clicked through the usernames, a gallery of local faces, people he'd seen around Modesto, familiar, yet now sinister. And then he found one that sent a cold wave through his stomach. Reeves Body Paint 209. It was a rival shop, located across town. They weren't subtle either. The caption on their repost was a direct, calculated jab. "Our team keeps it clean. No gangs, no questions." That's when the horrifying clarity hit Darnell. This wasn't just a prank gone awry, not a simple misunderstanding. This was calculated. This was an orchestrated attack, a weapon wielded against him. There were people, powerful people, who actively wanted him out of the picture. And Vince? He hadn't defended Darnell. He hadn't corrected the malicious narrative. Instead, he'd allowed the lie to fester, to run wild, protecting his own fragile image at Darnell's devastating expense. Darnell opened his worn notebook. With a deliberate precision, he began to jot down names, dates, comments, anyone who had shared or reposted that insidious image. He wasn't planning revenge, not in the traditional sense. He was building the truth. Piece by painstaking piece. A fortress of facts against the encroaching falsehoods. As he sat there, meticulously collecting the threads of deceit, a heavy double knock reverberated from his front door. Darnell rose slowly, his movements almost a whisper in the quiet room, and pulled it open. Standing on his porch, wearing the exact same cut-off vest as before, was Royce, the Hells Angels rider. "I heard what happened," Royce said, his voice grave. Darnell offered no immediate reply. Royce looked him squarely in the eye. "Mind if I come in?" What Royce was about to reveal, Darnell knew, would irrevocably turn the entire situation on its head. Darnell stepped back just enough for Royce to enter. He didn't utter a "welcome," didn't need to. The small living room was hushed, save for the low hum of the old refrigerator. Royce's gaze swept the room, a flicker of surprise in his deep-set eyes as if he hadn't expected it to feel so utterly normal. Just a clean, modest place, adorned with family photos, a few tools scattered on the table, and the comforting, lingering scent of fresh coffee. "I saw the post," Royce said finally, his voice low. "Didn't take long before it started getting around." Darnell leaned against the wall, arms folded across his chest. "Guess it doesn't matter what the truth is when the lie sounds better?" Royce gave a curt nod. "Yeah, people love a story. Don't care if it's real." Then he looked Darnell straight in the face, his eyes piercing. "You lost your job over that." Darnell exhaled a short, bitter breath. "Fired the next day. No discussion. Just bad optics. A final check." Royce's jaw clenched. "You ever stop to ask who wanted that to happen?" The question snagged Darnell's attention, pulling him taut. "What do you mean?" Royce took a seat across from him, pulling out his phone and scrolling through a series of messages. "There's a guy I know from back in the day. Body workshop near the freeway. Name's Trevor Baines. Used to ride, used to talk big, never patched in. Always wanted to be affiliated, but nobody trusted him." "Reeves Body Paint," Darnell said, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Yeah, that's him," Royce confirmed. "I heard he's been trying to run. Vince out for years. Kept saying the shop was losing authentic riders. This was his shot. All he needed was a crack." Darnell stared at the table, the full weight of the calculated malice settling upon him. "So, he took a photo that wasn't his, spun a lie, and spread it to cut Vince off at the knees." Royce nodded. "He reached out to a guy I know, asked if I was doing business with your shop. Told him I dropped my bike off. Next thing I know, he's reposting your photo and talking like I'm your blood brother." Darnell let that sink in for a heavy second. "Why are you telling me this?" Royce stood up, his gaze unwavering. "Because you didn't judge me. I walked in wearing that patch, and you treated me like a man. That matters more than you think." Darnell followed him to the door. Royce paused before stepping out into the blinding sunlight. "You get the truth straight," he said, his voice low but firm. "Let me know. I don't mind setting the record right if that's what it takes." As the door shut behind him, Darnell felt a profound shift. This wasn't merely a misunderstanding any longer. It was a calculated setup, a meticulously executed ambush. And now, he knew precisely where to begin. The next morning, Darnell arrived at Vince's shop, a thick folder tucked under his arm and a quiet, burning resolve in his chest. He didn't slip in through the side entrance, as was his custom. He walked straight through the main front door and waited, a silent, unyielding presence, until Vince finally looked up from the cash register. "What the hell are you doing here?" Vince demanded, his voice laced with annoyance. Darnell calmly placed the folder on the counter. "This," he stated, tapping the cover with a deliberate finger, "is everything. Every repost, every comment, every message linked to that photo. Most of it tied back to Trevor Baines and Reeves Body Paint. He's been trying to squeeze you out for months." Vince's face subtly shifted, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, but he remained silent. "And the kid who took the picture, Zach," Darnell continued, his voice steady. "He's the one who handed it over. Might want to ask him how much Baines paid him." But what Vince did next, Darnell never could have predicted. Vince stared at the folder, his hands resting on the counter, as if unsure whether to grasp it or sweep it away in disgust. For a moment, he said nothing, just stood there, his face tight, his eyes flicking frantically between the incriminating paperwork and Darnell's resolute face. Then finally, he spoke. "You saying Zach sold you out? That he was working with Baines?" "I'm saying you fired the wrong man," Darnell replied, the weight of the truth hanging in the air. Vince opened the folder, his fingers fumbling slightly as he flipped through the pages. There were screenshots, time-stamped reposts, meticulously logged comments. At the very bottom, a printed message, a clear exchange between Zach and a burner account, an account unequivocally linked to a phone number used by Reeves Body Paint. Zach had sent the photo himself. "He sold it," Darnell reiterated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Not for much, either. A couple hundred. That's all it took." Vince rubbed the back of his neck, a weary gesture. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Darnell corrected him, his tone sharp. Vince looked up, his eyes now tired, heavy with a new realization. "You gotta understand, Darnell. People were calling. Clients we've had for years. My rep was on the line." "So you threw me under the bus," Darnell finished for him. "I made a call under pressure," Vince conceded, his voice barely audible. "Doesn't mean it was the right one." Darnell nodded once, a brief, definitive motion. "No, it doesn't." Just then, the glass front door swung open, and in walked Royce, vest on, boots muddy, sunglasses hanging from his shirt collar. Every eye in the room swiveled, fixated on him. He didn't wait for permission. He walked straight to the counter, took up a commanding position next to Darnell, and slapped down a small stack of glossy flyers. "Y'all want to know who I am?" Royce declared, his voice booming, loud enough to command the attention of the entire shop. "Name's Royce Benton. I ride with the Modesto chapter. Been clean since 2011. Run a halfway house for ex-cons, out in series." He pointed a firm finger at Darnell. "Treated me with more respect than half the businesses in this town. Fired him for working on my bike. That's coward work." Silence descended, heavy and absolute. Royce leaned in close to Vince, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "You know how many of your clients got family locked up. Folks that made mistakes, but are trying to do right. You going to fire them too, when someone comes knocking?" Vince offered no response. Royce swept his gaze across the shop, then returned his focus to Darnell. "You let me know if you open your own spot. I'll bring every rider. I know your way." He gave Darnell a nod, solid and real, then strode out the door like he owned the entire street. Vince slowly rubbed his face, then sank down behind the counter, a profound sigh escaping him. "I messed up." Darnell didn't argue. "I can try to fix this," Vince offered, looking up with a hint of desperation. "Put a statement out. Talk to the press. You come back, we get ahead of it." But Darnell was already shaking his head, a decisive, quiet refusal. "I'm not coming back," Darnell stated. Vince looked genuinely surprised. "Why not?" "Because you didn't have my back when it mattered," Darnell explained, his voice even, yet laced with an undeniable steel. "And now that the smoke's clearing, you're just trying to protect your name. I can't work in a place where loyalty only goes one way." He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and turned to leave. As he walked through the front door, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. "You want to make this right?" he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Start by telling the truth loud and clear." But Darnell wasn't done yet, because if this town had turned its back on him, he was about to show them what rebuilding from nothing truly looked like. The next week passed in a blur. Darnell didn't sit idle. It simply wasn't in his nature. Instead, he got to work, making calls, knocking on doors, shaking hands, reaching out to people who knew his name, who had witnessed his meticulous work, who had bikes gathering dust in their garages with no one they truly trusted to touch them. One of the first to answer the call was Royce. He hadn't been bluffing when he promised to bring riders. Word spread quickly through the community. Black riders, Latino riders, even a few white guys who kept their politics quiet but their bikes roaring. A patch didn't matter. What mattered was honesty, skill, someone who didn't talk down to them or inflate prices just because they looked like they didn't belong. By Friday, Darnell had 4 bikes lined up in his driveway, and a 5th was being trailered in from Stockton. He wasn't waiting for a building. He started right there, from his garage. A folding table, a sturdy jacklift, his old trusted tools, and a plastic bin for parts. It was humble, but it worked. And more importantly, it felt profoundly real. Then the story hit the local news. The headline read something like, "Mechanic fired after helping biker." Was it fair? They didn't get every detail perfectly accurate, but the core truth was there. Zach had leaked the photo. Reeves' body paint had twisted it into a malicious smear campaign. And Vince had given a quote at the end, his voice shaky on the recording. "I made the wrong call," he admitted. "I let fear talk louder than facts." The phone started ringing off the hook. Some calls were from eager reporters, some from old clients expressing remorse for their silence. A couple simply said, "Man, we saw the news. That was wrong." And then there was the one call that made Darnell pause, his heart skipping a beat. It came from a woman named Charlene Morales, a retired parole officer. She ran a nonprofit dedicated to helping formerly incarcerated individuals, particularly those with valuable trades, re-enter the workforce. She explained that she had a few men with tools and time, skilled hands yearning for an opportunity, but no one willing to give them a shot. "You build something," she said, her voice brimming with quiet conviction. "We'll send you work. Good men. Just need a break." Darnell sat in silence after that call. Not because he was at a loss for words, but because for the first time in days, the suffocating bitterness began to dissipate. That weekend, he called in a favor from Skip securing a small, dusty corner of the old junkyard adjacent to Skip's lot. Skip, ever the stand-up guy, promised to help him pour concrete if it came to that, claiming the city still owed him for some ancient mishap. They set up a sturdy tent, strung up work lights, and within hours a few guys started to show up, pulling their bikes, eager to share their stories. One of them was Marcus Bright, 39, recently released after serving time for a bar fight that had spiraled out of control. Marcus had been turned away from 2 shops that very week. Darnell simply handed him a wrench. "Ever pulled apart a primary?" he asked. Marcus grinned, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Not in a while," he confessed, "but I still remember." That moment mattered. This endeavor wasn't merely about a job anymore. It was about providing men like Marcus a reason to get up, to show up, just as Darnell himself had shown up every single morning at Vince's shop, long before a single photo had branded him as dangerous. Later that night, Darnell updated the nameplate on his garage. "Cooper's Rebuild and Repair," it read, painted boldly in red underneath, followed by a simple creed. No judgment, just work. But even as momentum built, there was still one last surprise awaiting Darnell. Something he never saw coming. The Monday after Cooper's rebuild and repair officially opened for business, a matte black Ford F-250 rumbled into the gravel lot just after noon. Darnell was deep under a Yamaha V-Star, wrench in hand, when he heard the truck door slam. He slid out from beneath the bike, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked up. It was Vince. No clipboard, no folder, just him. He wore jeans and a wrinkled shop tee, his hands tucked into his pockets. Darnell didn't say anything, merely waited. Vince's gaze swept across the makeshift repair shop, tarp-covered bikes, tools organized on plastic shelves, a few riders sitting on folding chairs sipping from paper cups. Nothing fancy, but it hummed with an undeniable life. "You built this fast," Vince observed, his voice quiet. "I didn't have time to waste," Darnell replied flatly, his tone even. Vince nodded slowly. "I came to say something. Maybe it's late, maybe it doesn't matter, but I'm gonna say it anyway." Darnell crossed his arms, but didn't stop him. "I got scared," Vince confessed, his voice tinged with regret. "Not of you. Not really. I got scared of what people would say. The looks, the whispers. Thought I was protecting the shop, but I didn't protect the man who kept it running." Darnell remained silent, his expression unreadable. Vince took a shaky breath. "You made that place better. I never told you that. I should have. And when all this happened, I should have stood next to you, not behind a closed door." Darnell looked him squarely in the eye. "You done?" Vince nodded. "Yeah." "Good. Then listen." Darnell stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You didn't just fire me. You made it okay for everybody else to turn their backs. You made silence feel normal. That don't just disappear." "I know," Vince conceded, his voice quiet, filled with a new humility. "I won't ask you to come back. I wouldn't if I were you. I just wanted to say what I should have said before." He turned to leave, but paused, looking back at Darnell. "You need anything? Tools, lifts, scrap parts? I mean it. It's yours." Then he walked back to his truck and drove away. Darnell watched the tail lights disappear into the Modesto heat, then turned his gaze back to his burgeoning garage. Inside, Marcus was patiently helping a teenager clean an air filter, their heads bent in concentration. Royce leaned against a workbench, assisting another rider in patching a tire, his presence a quiet, unwavering support. And on the wall, someone had taped up a handwritten sign, stark and clear. "Your past ain't a problem here. We just fix things." Later that week, Darnell was sitting on his porch when an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a crisp note, handwritten direct and to the point. "You were done wrong. You didn't fold. Much respect. Enclosed is a token of support from those who ride." There was a check, a substantial sum of $5,000, signed simply, "Modesto Chapter." Darnell sat there for a long time, staring at it, not because of the money itself, but because of the profound meaning it carried. The very same patch that had cost him his job was now the unexpected catalyst for his shop's growth. Funny how life works. By the end of the month, Cooper's rebuild and repair was pulling in steady work, a constant flow of customers drawn by the story, by the respect for how Darnell had handled himself, and by riders who declared they would never trust anyone else with their machines after meeting him. Darnell didn't chase revenge. He chased purpose. And in doing so, he discovered something far more valuable than any job had ever given him. His voice, his peace, his pride. He didn't have to shout. He simply let his work speak for itself. And this time, Everyone listened. Because reputation can be shattered in a second. But respect, that's earned, rebuilt, and protected with every single choice you make. Don't be the one who stays quiet when someone's being torn down. Speak truth, stand tall, and remember, silence can do more damage than hate ever could. Now let me ask you, what would you have